Welcome, Michael Laimo, and welcome to all of you who are tuning in live, you who are watching the video replay. So nice to have you with me, Michael. And I want to say, Laimo and Blandy, we are not going to be lame and we are not going to be bland.
No.
Michael and I have been having a joke about our surnames before we came live, so we both get teased about our surnames.
We do.
So no lameness, no blandness in this video today.
We'll do our best.
So thanks for being here, Michael.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So 8 novels, 4 short story collections, 2 films. I want to start with the one thing, because there's something about 842, and I was like, what's the one? So what's the one thing that has kept you going, that has driven you to do what you do as a writer?
Oh, it's really just a love for the craft, the ability to create something out of nothing. These are just my ideas, my creative thought. I'm able to express myself as clearly as I can through writing. And it's funny, people, tell me, well, what's your book about? What's your story about? And I have trouble kind of vocalizing exactly, what my work is about. But once I sit in front of the computer and the thoughts start rolling, it's very, very easy to just communicate in that sense with my brain to my hands and into the computer. So it's really just a love for the craft and to be able to create.
I love that love for the crafts. Let's go right back then, because I know that you started reading before you started really getting into the writing. So how did you develop that love for the craft? Where did it come from?
Well, I've always been a huge horror fan ever since I was a kid, and I gravitated towards horror literature in my teens, reading. I started with Clive Barker. I think at the time the books of blood were brand new, and I started reading those. Clive Barker, I moved on to Dean Koontz, Robert McCammon, Stephen King, and just devoured that stuff for about 10 years. And then in my mid-20s or so, just that creative drive in me was asking me to do something. And I started just jotting, longhand short stories in a notebook. And I still have that original notebook. It's one of those composition notebooks that's filled from beginning to end with just short story ideas. And I remember I started on a typewriter, moved on to a Brother word processor. And then from that point, I started submitting short stories to small desktop publications, ultimately selling my first one, I think, at age like 27.
And how did it feel to make that progression from, I love the way that you described it. You were reading, but then there was just the sense of wanting to create yourself, and going from just jotting in that notebook. I love that you still have it, by the way, to then submitting. What did you have to do to take you from one to the next phase?
The thrill of creating was something that, only lasted so long. I enjoyed what I was doing, and I had about 10 short stories, and I'm like, well, I'd love for other people to read them. So at the time there was no internet, or the internet was just starting out. And so I went to the bookstore and purchased the novel and short story writers market. And I would go through and highlight all the potential markets for myself, anybody that was publishing horror. And ultimately started submitting. And I think I had about 30 to 40 rejections before I sold my first short story to a desktop magazine called Heliocentric Net. And the story was titled 1111. And I think it's been published about 6 or 7 times since then, in different venues.
That's great, Michael. So this sense of, I got these stories, I want other people to be enjoying them too. And then taking you to the place of having those rejections. So I want to just take a pause, because I know we've got a couple of people joining us. So hey, Sean. Hey, Paul. Paul's giving you some kudos for the writers that you've mentioned.
Hey, Paul.
Michael. So I love that, 30 to 40 rejections, but you kept going. You got the book. It was showing you who to submit to. So something says, that was very systematic. You had real clarity. You were going to get it done. And then those rejections came in. So what would you say to the writer out there who's like, oh, I sent my story off, but it got rejected? You're saying you did 30 to 40.
Sure. I think it was the quality of the rejections that kept me going. And I recently posted on Twitter the very first rejection I ever got, and it was from Mark Rainey at Death Realm magazine. And he sent me a handwritten 2-page letter saying, for a first effort, this is amazing, and this is what you did right, and this is what you did wrong. And because the editors that I was submitting to were willing to take the time to tell me what I was doing right and wrong, empowered me and enabled me to make corrections in my work and move forward to the point where I was eventually starting to sell my work.
Beautiful. So that real specificity in the quality of the rejection, and you being prepared to do the work, because I know that some people can get really stuck. They're like, they get the rejection, but they're not prepared to do the edits. They feel they take it personally. So it sounds like you were looking at it from a different perspective. Rather than taking it personally, you were able to do the work. So what was it that you were able to say to yourself that enabled you to have that room to grow and improve?
There's always room for improvement, always room for growth. I want to be the very best writer I can possibly be. There's the beginning writer, and then there's Stephen King, and then there's everything else in between. And there's a lot of rungs on that ladder to climb. And, even to this day, I feel like I'm still only about a third of the way towards this Stephen King rung on the ladder, so to speak. There's always room for improvement, no matter how good you are, no matter how much you write. I don't never, ever take it personally, especially when my books had gotten bad reviews. People talked about, the writing being poor, and I'm like, it got published, so it's not that bad. Sure, I agree with you on some points. I go back and read some of my work from 10 years ago and kind of roll my eyes at it a little bit. But, that's the way it is.
We've got some respect here from Jane for the perseverance.
Hi, Jane.
Thanks, Jane. So let's talk about now, like you've been mentioning your books. So let's move on to your books. I mean, I know that you've got 4 short story collections published, but you've also got 8 novels under your belt. So when did you make the transition from writing short stories to, okay, I want to write a book now?
Okay. I had written and published probably 25 to 30 short stories back in the 90s and the early 2000s. There were a lot of desktop publications that were, there were fierce competition to get into them. And even though they didn't pay, they paid in copies. That's where it was a great training ground. It's where I got my start. After publishing, quite a few of them, and then to the point where I was actually getting paid for some of them, I said, okay, well, what's the next step? What do I need to do now? I need to write a novel. So back in the AOL days, I became very good friends with Tom Piccirilli, who was very successful in the 90s and 2000s, and unfortunately, we've lost him in the last few years. But he was an incredible mentor for me. He, as it turned out, was local to where I lived. So we used to get together and talk shop all the time. And I learned so much from him. And he gave me some pointers on what to do as far as novel writing is concerned. And I went with it. And when I was done, he was kind enough to go through and mark it up for me. And I went back, polished it as much as I could, and then started soliciting. I wanted to get in with Leisure Books, who had a great horror line at the time. And I submitted it and waited almost 4 years before the book was published.
Beautiful. Let's dig into that more, Michael. Thanks for sharing that it took you 4 years, because we're getting some real appreciation in the group from your attitude. Paul, yes, absolutely right. I am loving Michael's attitude as well. And Sean, yeah, humility, realistic outlook, rare gifts. Folks, those of you watching, those of you tuning in now, this is really what it takes. Like, I love that you're taking that step-by-step approach, Michael. You're like, what's the next step? You've got the mentor.
Exactly.
So what kept you going for those 4 years?
Just the baby steps, a little bit of success here and there. And when I finished that first book, before it was even accepted, I had started my second one. My second book that I wrote was Sleepwalker. That book took me 18 months to write. It's almost 120,000 words. It was a long book. By the time I finished it, Leisure had accepted my first book, and they were looking for a second, and I gave them that, and it got rejected. And that hurt. That was one of the biggest hurts for me at the time, because I had spent 18 months writing that book. They just said, it's not a horror novel, it's a science fiction novel. Give us a horror novel. So I had written and published a trilogy of short stories called the Golden Eyes series. And I wanted to turn that into a novel. So I pitched it to Leisure as a second book. I said, hey, look, this is what I want to do. And he says, that's what I'm looking for. Write it. So I spent probably a good 10 months writing Deep into Darkness, and that ended up being my best-selling book to this day. It was nominated for the Bram Stoker Award, and it was turned into a movie.
Ooh, so we're beginning to talk about movies. Just before we go there, I want to just ask you one more point, because I think what you said about the difference between horror and science fiction, and when someone is publishing you in a particular genre, that there's something important about that. Sure. So I want to just dig into something that you said off camera about the horror genre that I just thought was really interesting. This idea of gore. Mm-hmm. And the difference between gore for the sake of it and gore that moves the story on. I never knew that gore was actually something that could move the story on. So I'd love for you to just speak a little bit about how you're using the horror elements to make sure that the story keeps moving and those pages keep turning.
Sure. So, with Sleepwalker, he called it a science fiction novel. And in a sense, it was, even though I had thrown in a lot of gory scenes in the book, they were there because the scene called for it, but it wasn't necessary for the plot, so to speak.
Right.
So with Deep into Darkness, which is kind of a creature feature, okay, there are creatures and they're after, the protagonist. So it's a horror novel. There has to be gore to it. So in certain scenes where there's a sacrifice involved on a stone, that in a sense, the sacrifice is necessary to move the plot along. And because it's a sacrifice, there's going to be gore involved. So I think, like we talked about certain movies where gore is absolutely necessary to move the plot along, like in Hostel or Green Inferno or even The Walking Dead. You need gore to move those stories along. When you're talking about gore just for gore's sake, and you have a lot of foreign horror films that focus on that, that kind of turns me off a little bit. I have to have a good story to go along with it.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so Stevens also was a bit like me. He never thought he thought it was the other way around. So yeah, really great to get that clarification. So let's look at Deep into Darkness, because we've got the poster behind you, which is like, I'm glad that we got that into shot. It's a mirror, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
It's kind of hard to figure out which hand. So what was that like? What was the experience like to have come all of this way? Because it'd taken 4 years for your first novel, then you'd had the rejection, and then the pitch got accepted by Leisure Books, and then it's now being turned into a film. What was that like?
Oh God, it was a dream come true. It kept me very busy to the point where it actually affected my writing a little bit, because I was focusing so much on the filmmaking. Deep into Darkness is actually the second film that I had made. At the time, I think I was in the right place at the right time. NBC's Chiller Network were looking for books to turn into original films. And I teamed up with a production company out of Connecticut who I was lucky that one of their production assistants was familiar with my work and said, you got to read, Dead Souls and Deep into Darkness by Michael Laimo. They would make great movies. So they first pitched Dead Souls, and it got rejected. But then a year later, they came back and said, is Dead Souls still available? We think we can do something with that now. And then that happened. And I was very involved from the very beginning of it, from the, sitting in a boardroom in New York City in the NBC buildings, pitching ideas back and forth, all the way to playing little cameos in both films. So it was, what a great experience. And to this day, it's still, I'm still friendly with the actors that were in the films, the production team, highlight of my career.
But again, let's go back, because it's it's that persistence again, because the first time round that door didn't open for you. But I'm getting the sense that you're in it. Like, you're on the court. You're not, you're not going to have an injury and get off the court. So what was it? What were you thinking? What was going through your mind when that first rejection came in, and what kept you going?
I expect the worst and hope for the best. So when the rejections come in, it's part of the game. You use them as a learning experience. Okay, what did I do wrong, and how can I improve? How can I make this, a better opportunity for me? With the movie thing, again, it was, there was luck involved. I think, being rejected and then having them come back and say, you know what, we changed our mind. I mean, that doesn't happen very often. And then to have them say, you know what, we really like what we're doing here, and we read Deep in the Darkness. We want to do another movie from you. It was the same, it was the same network, same production team. And, it was very, very empowering, so to speak, to just be able to, witness your work come to, so many people, 80, 90 people working on a film based on something that you wrote. I mean, that was incredible. So, I hate to say I try to manifest good things, and I'm doing that now with my new book, just trying to manifest the very, very best opportunity I can, and hope it works out. Positive attitude. It's such an important part of being a writer and finding success.
No, you are totally in the space to talk about manifestation. Like, I'm high-fiving you with that, because when you talked about when that rejection came in and you were immediately asking, what can I learn? And then you were saying it was really empowering. Well, the fact is, Michael, you're behaving in an empowering way. When you take that responsibility, you're reminding yourself, I'm at the center of what I create. Right. You could have been like, oh, you assholes, something's wrong with you because you didn't take my book. Like, you immediately took that power within you and said, what can I learn? And that, I think that is the difference between someone who is at home and complaining about the fact that their work isn't going anywhere versus you, who's sitting at home, opening up that laptop and figuring out how to make it better, how to do these adjustments. Sure. I love that.
There's always room for improvement. To sit there and dwell on negative events that occur, you have to get past it. I have a new book that I wrote, and I just started querying agencies, and I expect rejection. I do, but I want to hear what they have to say. I want to know, hey, it was well written, it's good enough, but it's not right for us. You get a lot of that. But sometimes they'll take some more time and try to explain to you, hey, maybe you should try this, that, or the other thing. And I don't do that. I'll sit down and I'll spend another month editing my book if I have to make it right for someone.
Let's talk about this latest book. So this is Missed Connection that you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Perfect. So this is interesting because you're now taking a step from the horror genre into a new genre. So this is erotic thriller. So again, what was it that made you want to come out of writing the horror, the gore, but making sure that plot moves forward into exploring probably a different kind of protagonist and a different way of styling that story?
Right. So, I don't want to say I'm pigeonholed as a horror writer, but when you Google my name, it comes up, Michael Laimo, horror writer. That's because that's all I've really done over the years is horror. I took a few years off, I kind of lost a little. I felt that I had accomplished as much as I possibly could with writing and the horror genre. Took a few years off, and then this year, I decided to slowly get back into it. It was kind of like riding a bike. You're a little unsteady at first, but then as you get going, my voice came back to me. I kind of put it out there that I was writing again, was offered a couple of short story opportunities, which I both sold. So I said, okay, I still got it. So in the meantime, I knew I wanted to write another book, but I didn't want it to be a horror novel. And I had just finished reading You by Carolyn Kepnes, and subsequently watching the miniseries on Netflix. And I said, this is what I want to do. I want to write something that would be good for a Netflix series. And I liked the idea of writing a first-person story through the eyes of an anti-hero, a bad guy that you can root for, so to speak. And came up with a basic idea and just kind of went with it. And 10 months later, I've got a complete novel.
And you're not a planner, are you?
No, I flew by the seat of my pants. I just took a basic idea and started with that, and I just kind of wanted to see where it would take me. And to me,
give us a sense of what that basic idea was, just so that, again, so it's really clear, like, oh, so that's a basic idea, and I could start writing a book on such an idea.
Okay, so I wanted to write an idea about a guy who's married. He's having trouble in his marriage. He's had a history of abuse in his life. He's an unhappy person and decides, I need to have an affair, but he doesn't know with who. So he goes into the park and starts taking pictures of random women and picks, he finds one and he becomes obsessed with her. And he does everything he can to try to find this woman. All he has is this picture, and he does everything he can to try to find this woman in order to initiate some sort of affair with her. And it obviously snowballs into a bigger, better problem than he thought he ever had. And it basically turns him from someone with problems into someone who solves his problems through greed, betrayal, and even murder. So the anti-hero.
Yeah. And I love that because sometimes we can get an anti-hero story where they're so bogged down with their problems, there's a sense that the narrative isn't moving along. But I love that you're saying he's actually solving his problems from doing these dark things. Right. So me, I get that sense of like, I'm going to be reading and finding out what's going to be happening next.
Yep, that's exactly it. He, in order to write a good anti-hero story, you have to like the reader has to like that character. So you have to feel some empathy for him, regardless of the laws he's breaking and the things he's doing. And I think I've accomplished that. That's one of the things that nobody else has read a word of this except me. So being that I've just started submitting it, I'm curious to get some feedback to see.
I can see we've got loads of stuff coming in from the chat. So I want to just come over to the chat because I think we've got some questions there, but there's a few more things I want to ask you about your latest book as well. So we'll just pop a pin in that and come back. So Stephen's asking, when you edit tailored to a publisher, do you keep the original or just improve over it?
Well, both. After every session, every day, I email myself a copy. And then I make those changes to the new version I'm doing. But ultimately, if I feel I need to go back to some of the changes I made, I'll go back to one of the older saved copies that I have, and I'll go through it and say, all right, how can I incorporate this? And I'll go back and forth. There's a lot of that goes on, a lot of changing things. In this book, I was about 3/4 of the way through where I realized I need to change the relationship, the tone of the relationship between my protagonist and his father. So I had to literally go back to the beginning and start again and go through and change every interaction with between the two characters in order to make the plot work.
I love that way of describing it, because I think that was something I spotted in your Twitter feed where you talked about the fact that the first draft was in a pretty good shape because you'd gone back and done so many edits as you were writing that first draft.
I do. I edit as I go along. I know a lot of writers, they'll just write what I call the skeleton of the book, and they'll start at the beginning and won't stop until they get to the end. And I find that problematic. I really, really need to know my story inside and out. I don't want to forget about what I wrote in chapter 3, and then all of a sudden I'm in chapter 30 and I'm writing about something completely different that doesn't jive with what happened in chapter 3. So I'm always going back and editing through and have almost every word memorized, all 100,000 of them.
Lovely. It sounds like, there's a real instinctive process because you're not planning, but you're just holding that story within you. And so the experience and the knowing of that story, it makes it inevitable that you're going to keep coming up with new ideas and making progression.
Sure. And little tidbits that I'll put in early in the book, which I would think have really no, no part of the plot that I'm planning out, will eventually come into play in a completely different way than I originally thought. And that's exciting. That's one of the real exciting parts. I have a twist that takes place on the last 2 pages of the book that the readers will never see coming. And I didn't even see it coming until I got there. And I was like, oh my God, I could do this. And this works. And I just have to go back and change a couple of little things, and then this could work. So so that's what I find most exciting about writing a novel is the fact that you can really almost surprise yourself. It's like it almost writes itself for you.
Yeah. I love that, Michael. And we'll come back to the questions in a sec, but I just want to say that really speaks to this idea that if you're not being interested in what you're writing, how can you expect your reader to be interested? So I love that you're enjoying what's coming out and you're surprising yourself. That definitely means that the reader is not going to see it coming. Okay, let's come back. It looks like Sean got your had his question answered. So let's just pop that appreciation. Hearing such a growth approach to writing rejection is fantastic. Yeah, really nice validation on that point that you made, Michael. Love that you go for it. Do you build character in the first draft and then go back to add in, or only go forwards and build your characters in the rewrite? So I think that was the question that then you sort of answered yourself. Yeah, perfect.
I'm always rebuilding.
Yeah.
Always adding, like I said, there's the skeleton of the book, but then you go back and add you flesh it out, so to speak, and just little things that you can add. Even if you think that book is done, sometimes you can go back and just add little things to make it, that much better.
Yeah. So let's finish with how you do it, how you make time to write, how you get down with your laptop and actually make it a productive writing session with everything. There's life going on. There may be a rejection that's just happened. So how do you make it happen that when you sit down, you actually get those words down?
Well, you have to make time to write. Back, when I was writing for leisure, I used to commute into Manhattan every day on the Long Island Railroad. So I had a 1-hour ride in and 1-hour ride back. So that was 2 hours a day I was writing. And then on the weekends, I would squeeze in 3 to 4 hours each day. Now I'm no longer commuting, so I have to squeeze in that writing at night. So I do an hour to 2 hours every night without fail. And then on the weekends, I disappear in the office. I'll start at 7 in the morning, and sometimes I won't come out of there till 5 or 6 at night. And it goes like that. It goes really fast, especially when you're in the groove. It goes quickly.
Beautiful. So it sounds like you're working more to a time, because Sean's asking if you aim for a daily word count. It sounds like you're just aiming for that time count, or maybe you do.
Yeah, it's sometimes I'm just editing and my word count might go in reverse. It's just, I don't really look at the word count and how many words I'm doing every day or how many pages I'm doing every day. I'm just, where I am in the story and where it's going to take me. That's what matters the most, I think. Sure, I look at my total word count every time I'm finished to see where I am, because you do have to pace yourself at some point, because you have to pass that 80,000 word mark in order to be considered for a novel, so to speak. Yeah. I with Misconnection, I wanted to do 100,000 words and it came out to 99,000. So I think I hit it. Yeah, I got lucky there.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that you say that sometimes that time just really flies by. For me, I really get a sense, Michael, because, your passion for the horror and now your passion for this new genre, like it's really coming across. So I really get a sense that you just love being in that story. So I can understand why that time just goes. What do you do when you're at the computer and it's like the time seems to be moving slightly slower and you're not in that flow?
Sure, it does happen. There are some days where I'm just tired, the words aren't coming, may have a headache. When that happens, I shut the computer. Yeah, I just, today's not a good day for writing, because even if I force myself to get that hour or two in, I might just have to go back the next day and erase it all, and I've done that. I was like, I'll say to myself, I'll look at it and I'll say, what was I thinking when I wrote that? And I'll rewrite the whole thing.
Yeah. Wow, Michael, it has been such a treat to have you with us. And folks, thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. It really sounds like what you've been talking about today has been really resonating with everyone.
Great.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
Awesome. I think we're going to have you back, because I certainly want to find out what's going to happen with missed connection. And okay. Do you ever do readings? Do you enjoy reading?
Oh, sure. I've done many over the years. Sure.
Yeah, I've certainly got intrigued with this story. It might be fun to have you back sort of in 6 months to see where you're at, and maybe even hear you read some extracts.
I would be happy.
Let's watch this space for that.
Okay.
So, thank you so much, those of you who tuned in live, and thanks those of you who watched in the replay. So yeah, let us know, what did you get out of the conversation? What has this inspired you to do with your writing? And Michael, let people know where's the best place for people to get in touch with you.
Okay. I joined Twitter about 5 or 6 months ago. So you can search me out at Laimo Michael on Twitter. Or you can reach out to me on Facebook, Michael Laimo.
Perfect. I put your Twitter link in the chat so people can find that in the chat. So what I'll do is I'll just grab that Facebook link as well, and I'll put it in the comments below so people can reach out.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, Stephen wants you back. So
Thanks,
we'll definitely make sure that we can get Michael back. Thanks everyone watching, and see you guys next week. Same time, same place. Thanks, Michael. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you.